The building had 47 floors. Marcus Collins had worked inside that building for 12 years. 12 years, and in all that time, not a single person from the executive levels had ever learned his name. Not once. He didn't dwell on it anymore, or rather, he'd learned not to. Dwelling on it took him to places that were hard to come back from, places where you started asking questions about the shape of your life, about whether it was supposed to be this small. He fixed the HVAC units on floors 3 through 23, every single day. He'd clip his badge to his grey coveralls and move through those upper levels. He'd carry his toolbox into offices where people sat at desks, staring at screens, making decisions about things he didn't understand. And they'd barely glance at him. Sometimes they wouldn't even look up. They'd just keep typing, keep talking on their phones, keep existing in whatever high-stakes world they inhabited, while he worked in the spaces around them, invisible. He'd learned something over 12 years. He'd learned how to be in a room without quite being present. You developed a skill for that if you tried hard enough. You learned to move quietly. You learned not to interrupt important conversations. You learned how to be useful and invisible at the same time. The building was beautiful in its own way. Glass and steel and expensive wood everywhere. The lobby communicated wealth without saying a word. Everything was positioned perfectly. Everything was designed to tell you something. You belong here, or you don't. Marcus had never spent much time in the lobby. He used the service elevator. He knew the routes that didn't pass through the spaces where people might notice him. His hands were calloused. The creases in his palms held an embedded darkness that never quite washed away. Grease and dirt from 1,000 repairs, settling into the lines of his skin like they belonged there. He wore steel-toed boots that he'd resoled twice. Once before Sophie was born. Once after. The leather had cracked in places. The sole was wearing thin at the heel, but they still worked. Everything Marcus owned still worked. That's how he thought about it. Not beautiful, just functional. Beauty was a luxury. It came after security. And security was something he was still working on. $34 an hour. That was the wage. 40 hours a week was the official schedule. Though there was usually work beyond that. The building never slept. The systems never stopped. 40 hours at $34 meant $1,400 before taxes. Rough numbers. He'd done this math so many times it was automatic. After taxes, roughly $1,100. After rent for the apartment, 2 bedrooms, thin walls, you could hear your neighbors fighting through them, it was $800. After utilities and the internet Sophie needed for school, $600. After groceries, $400. After his truck payment, $200. After insurance and gas and the medications he still paid for even though his mother was gone, there was very little left. This was the mathematics of his life. He'd become fluent in it. He could do it in his head now. The moment he got paid, he'd divide the money into designated slots. Every dollar had a purpose. It was meditation in a way. It was also a trap. But there was Sophie. Sophie Collins, 9 years old. She still believed her father was the most capable person in the world. This belief hadn't happened by accident. He'd constructed it deliberately, maintained it carefully, protected it with a fierceness that only a parent who'd learned hardship could understand. She didn't know about the math. She didn't know he hadn't fixed his truck's oil leak because oil was expensive. She didn't know that if the truck failed, everything would fall apart. She didn't know the clarinet lessons she'd asked for 2 years ago had come from a second job on weekends. She didn't know her father sometimes skipped lunch. Not because he was busy, because there wasn't quite enough food for both of them at the end of the month. She knew he loved her. She knew he was always there. She knew that when she asked him something, he listened. Really listened. Not the way some adults did. Not with half his mind somewhere else. And Marcus had learned how to live in 2 worlds. By day, he was invisible. A maintenance man moving through a building that didn't see him, working on systems no one would notice until they failed. By evening, he was a father. Present, attentive, showing his daughter a version of himself that wasn't crushed by financial calculation. It was exhausting, this maintenance of 2 selves. But it was the only thing that made sense. It was the thing that mattered. Derek Paulson noticed something was wrong one Tuesday morning. Derek was the supervisor. 30 years older than Marcus, a management position. A salary that probably allowed for unexpected expenses. They worked in the same building, but they inhabited it in very different ways. Derek had an office on the 21st floor. A door that closed, a computer, a phone, a title that meant he didn't have to carry a toolbox. Marcus had seen Derek exactly 4 times in 12 years. They were in the same company, but they worked in different worlds. On that Tuesday morning, Derek found him on the mechanical access level. Marcus was replacing a burned-out ballast on one of the fluorescent fixtures. Routine work. He knew exactly how long it would take. He was already calculating how many more he could do before lunch. "You look like hell, man." Derek's voice came from behind him. It wasn't accusatory, just an observation. Marcus didn't look up. "I'm fine. You look like you haven't slept in a week." "I sleep. You sleep at work." Derek said it like he'd seen it happen. "I've seen you in the break room at lunch with your head on the table. What's going on?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. He finished installing the new ballast, pressed it carefully into place. Then he turned to face Derek. It's been a long year. Derek considered him for a moment. He had the kind of face that suggested he was doing calculations, not math. Social calculations, measuring things, determining what was safe to say. I have a weird proposition for you. Marcus waited. There's someone who needs a date for an event. A woman. She's nice. She uses a wheelchair. The normal dating channels have been problematic for her. I mentioned your name to her. She'd like to know if you'd be interested. Marcus's immediate response was no. Complete no. He didn't have time for dating. He didn't have the emotional energy for something like that. For meeting someone new. For the complications that came with it. He had Sophie. He had a job that required all his attention. He had a careful balance that was already precarious. Adding another person to that equation felt like adding weight to something that was already straining under pressure. I'm not interested. Just listen for a second. Derek kept going. It's one evening. Friday night. Dinner at a nice place. They cover all the costs. You just show up, be yourself, no strings attached. No one's expecting anything. She just needs someone to sit across from her while she eats dinner. Marcus went back to cleaning up his tools. He knew exactly what this was. This was pity. Derek, who probably made 3 times what Marcus made, looking at him and seeing someone who needed help, someone struggling, someone who should be given a chance to have something normal. He didn't want that. He didn't want anyone's pity. But something stopped him from saying so. Some small part of him that had been buried for 12 years. Some part that remembered what it felt like to be more than just survival. Some part that remembered possibility. I'll think about it. That was the moment. Everything changed from that moment because Derek, hearing that small opening, pressed forward. Just say yes. What's the worst that could happen? You have a free dinner. You meet someone. Maybe you talk about something other than work for an evening. The thing about survival is that it narrows everything. Your vision becomes focused. Your world becomes small. Your thoughts are constantly occupied with what comes next. The next thing you need to do. The next problem you need to solve. The next way you need to stretch $1. Marcus had been operating in survival mode for so long that he'd almost forgotten. Forgotten what it felt like to consider something just because he might want to. Okay. He said it. I'll do it. Derek smiled. Good man. I'll text you the details. That evening, Marcus went home and told Sophie he had an event on Friday night. She nodded, already thinking about homework. She didn't ask questions. She accepted it too easily, which was a sign. Looking back, it was a clear sign. Derek knew his daughter. Derek understood things about their life that Marcus had been trying hard to keep hidden. Marcus owned one piece of dress clothing, a blazer from his uncle's funeral. 3 years ago. It was the only suit jacket he'd ever bought. He'd paid for it with a credit card, paid it off over 6 months, allocating a small portion of each paycheck to that debt while paying for everything else. He took the blazer out of the closet and looked at himself in the bathroom mirror. The blazer was tight across the shoulders now. 3 years of physical work had changed his body. The kind of work he did built muscle, built calluses, built a particular kind of strength. From repetition, from strain, from the daily requirement to move heavy things. But the blazer didn't fit anymore. It pulled across his shoulders. The buttons were tight. He looked at himself and saw exactly what he was. A maintenance worker trying to be something else. A man wearing clothes that didn't fit because they were the only clothes he had that came close. He pressed it with an iron and hung it on the back of his bedroom door. Tomorrow was Friday. Tomorrow he'd find out what Derek had set up. Chapter 2. The Trigger. Sophie asked the question on a Tuesday, not a Friday. The timing was important. It meant the question had an entire week to settle into Marcus's mind. A full week, before the actual event happened. She came home from school with a permission slip in her backpack, folded carefully between her social studies textbook and her reading journal, a field trip notice. But not the kind where you actually went somewhere physical. This was a career day, a school event where families were invited. Parents were supposed to come and talk about their jobs. The flyer had bright colors, enthusiasm. It promised that it would be enriching for the students. It promised that it would help them understand the breadth of career possibilities available in their futures. Marcus read the flyer while Sophie sat at the kitchen table, watching him. She was old enough to read her own mail now, old enough to understand what the words meant, old enough to do the mathematics herself, to look at her father's life and calculate what this request would mean. There's career day next month. She said it carefully. They want parents to come and talk about their jobs. Marcus's first instinct was to offer reassurance. Immediate reassurance. I'll be there. The words came out without thought. They were the thing you were supposed to say. But Sophie didn't look satisfied. She didn't look like she believed him. She looked the way she always looked when she was gathering data, collecting information, trying to understand the world she lived in. Will you really be able to go? She asked. Or will you need to be working? The question landed differently than she probably intended. She was 9 years old. She wasn't trying to be critical. She wasn't trying to point out his failures. She was asking the logical question based on the data she'd collected about her father's life. Over 9 years, her father worked. Her father was always working. So why would career day be any different? Why would she expect that this would be the thing he prioritized? Marcus reassured her. He ruffled her hair. He made the answer sound solid, committed. He made the promise with his voice. The way you make promises when you're not entirely sure you can keep them. You commit to them anyway and hope that something will align, something will change, something will make them possible. But that night, after Sophie was asleep, Marcus sat alone in the kitchen with the career day flyer in front of him. And something shifted in how he understood his own life. He'd become the kind of father who had to promise to show up for things. Not the way his own father had been absent, not willfully, not cruelly, not with deliberate disregard, but diminished nonetheless, present in body, but often somewhere else mentally, thinking about work, thinking about bills, thinking about the careful balance that kept them afloat. He'd worked very hard to not be like his own father. He'd worked very hard to be present, to be reliable, to be the one person his daughter could count on. But being reliable, he was realizing, wasn't the same thing as being fully there. His daughter had noticed. She had the kind of clear-eyed perception that children have, the ability to see what adults were doing and understand it without judgment. She understood that her father worked. She understood that there was money involved in this somehow. She understood that his work was important because they needed money to live. But she also understood something else, something harder. Her father had very little time for anything except work and her and sleep. And now she was being asked to imagine her father in a space where other fathers would be. She was calculating whether that was realistic, whether she should hope for that, or whether she should prepare herself for disappointment. This was what broke something in Marcus that night. Not the calculation itself, but the fact that his daughter had to do it at all. The next morning, Derek called again. Marcus hadn't thought he would ask twice. He'd assumed the offer was a one-time thing, something that came and went, but Derek was persistent. Did you think about it? Yeah? Marcus said it. He was already thinking about Sophie's question. He was already thinking about what it meant to never try anything beyond the narrow channel of survival. And I'll do it, Marcus said. He said it faster this time, with less hesitation. Friday night, right? Friday night, Derek confirmed. I'll text you the details. You're going to be fine. Just show up and be yourself. That evening, Marcus told Sophie where he was going. He didn't tell her it was supposed to be a date. That seemed like more information than she needed. He just said he was going to an event Friday night. She nodded, understanding that this was something her father needed to do. Understanding somehow that this was important, for a reason that went beyond the event itself. Have fun, Dad. She said it. Those 3 words stayed with him. Have fun. When was the last time anyone had wished him fun? When was the last time fun had even been a word that applied to his life? Fun was for people who weren't calculating. Fun was for people who had breathing room. Fun was for people who weren't always 3 unexpected expenses away from disaster. But maybe, Marcus thought, maybe that was exactly why he needed to go. Chapter 3. Before the collision Friday arrived, Marcus worked a full day at the building, replacing fixtures on the 32nd floor, unclogging a bathroom drain that had backed up, checking the HVAC calibration on the mechanical level, making sure the systems were running at optimal efficiency. He was always checking these things. The building never rested. The systems never stopped. There was always something that needed attention, some small failure that needed to be prevented or corrected. At 4 p.m. he clocked out. He drove home in his truck, a 2009 Ford that was beginning to show its age. The check engine light had been on for 3 months. He knew it was probably an oxygen sensor. He could fix it himself, but he'd have to buy the part, and the part cost money, and there was never quite enough money. So he drove around with the check engine light on, and hoped the truck would hold together long enough. At home, he showered. The shower was quick. He'd learned a long time ago how to wash efficiently, how not to waste hot water. He put on the blazer. The fabric was still tight across his shoulders. He still looked like a maintenance worker wearing a blazer. The transformation didn't happen because you dressed differently. It happened because something inside changed, and clothing was just the outward sign of that change. He didn't have that change yet. He just had the blazer. He drove downtown. The restaurant was called Meridian, located in a section of the city that Marcus rarely visited. This was where people who had money went. This was where the expensive things were. The buildings were nicer. The sidewalks were cleaner. The people moved with a particular kind of confidence. That came from knowing that they belonged in these spaces. Marcus did not have that confidence. The restaurant had large windows and soft lighting, the kind of aesthetic that communicated expense without announcing it. Expensive didn't shout. Expensive was quiet, confident. He arrived at 6:55. He was always early to things, a habit from his work. Arrive early. Understand the space. Know where the exits are. He walked in and told the host his name. Something shifted in the host's face. Subtle, but definite. A moment of recognition. Not unkind, just clear. "Right this way, sir," the host said, and instead of guiding him toward the main dining room where he could see couples and small groups sitting at tables, the host led him through a corridor. Toward the back of the restaurant, a private section, a private room. Marcus thought, this is strange, this is not what he expected. He entered the private dining room and saw her. A woman in a wheelchair, dark hair beginning to grey at the temples. Mid-40s maybe. Wearing clothing that fit her with a kind of precision that Marcus had learned to recognize as expensive, not flashy, just tailored perfectly to her body. She was watching him. Not with curiosity, not with the interest someone might have when they were about to meet someone new. She was watching with assessment. The way you watch something you're evaluating. Something you're trying to understand. She said his name. Marcus. Not a question, not an introduction, just confirmation of something she already knew. Marcus understood then. This was not a blind date setup. This was something else entirely. Part 2. Early Conflict. Chapter 4. The Ambush. The woman introduced herself with a particular kind of directness. The kind Marcus would come to learn was characteristic of her. She didn't soften the impact. She didn't ease him into it. She just stated the facts. "I'm Victoria Ashford," she said. "I'm the CEO of Ashford Systems." CEO! That word landed like a physical weight. A CEO was not something that came to the maintenance level of a building. A CEO was not something that spent time with people like Marcus. A CEO was the reason that people like Marcus had jobs. A CEO was the thing that decided whether those jobs would continue to exist. The anger came quickly. Cold anger. The kind that didn't express itself in volume, but in a particular kind of stillness. The kind that came from understanding that he'd been studied. That someone from a position of power had decided that he was interesting enough to investigate. "Why would a CEO care about a maintenance technician?" he asked. He heard the edge in his voice, the challenge in it. Victoria didn't flinch. She explained that Derek worked for her, that she did research on people who worked in her buildings, that his employment file had interested her, that she had a position that might suit him, and she wanted to meet him in person, to see whether he was serious about actual work. "Systems integration specialist," she said. "It's a real role, high-level work. The kind of position where competence matters because the stakes are real. If you get the work right, it saves lives. If you get it wrong, infrastructure fails." Marcus listened. But he was skeptical. He had a high school diploma, trade training, 12 years of experience fixing AVAC units and unclogging drains and replacing light fixtures. Why would a CEO want him? This felt like charity. This felt like being looked at from a position of abundance, and being offered a piece of that abundance out of pity. He didn't want that. He didn't want anyone's pity. But as Victoria continued to explain the role, something shifted in his understanding of her. She wasn't offering him a job because she thought he was broken and needed fixing. She was testing whether his brain worked the way her brain worked, whether he could think about systems, about problems, about complexity. They sat, they ordered dinner, and as they ate, Victoria explained the work in detailed technical terms. She described projects that required understanding how systems failed, how to anticipate failure modes, how to design redundancy. Marcus found that he understood this, not all of it, not immediately, but the logic was sound, the patterns made sense, the way one failure could cascade into others. He'd seen that in the building systems. He'd seen how one broken component could affect multiple systems. He asked questions, not defensive questions designed to protect himself, real questions, questions that showed he was actually thinking about what she was saying, questions that showed his mind was engaged. Victoria's responses came with nods. She seemed satisfied with his thinking. She seemed to be evaluating him in real time and finding him acceptable. But the setup bothered him, the deception, the orchestration of calling this a blind date when it was something else entirely. He pushed back. "Why didn't Derek just tell me what this was?" Marcus asked. "Why set it up this way? Why the deception?" Victoria answered with the same directness that had characterized everything about her. "Because I wanted to see who you are when you don't know what's happening. I wanted to see if you'd show up anyway, even when things didn't match what you expected. And I wanted to see if someone who made your choices," she paused, "the choice to step away from one path to follow another, would be willing to take another risk." There was an implication in those words that landed hard. She knew that he'd made choices, significant choices. She knew that his trajectory had bent around a child. That was something you could learn from an employment file. But it was also something that suggested this person had thought carefully about him. "I need to think about it," Marcus said finally. "I have my daughter. I need to understand what changes if I take something like this." Victoria nodded. She gave him her contact information. She said the offer was real. She said the work was real. She said she thought he was the kind of person who would care about doing it well. When Marcus left the restaurant that night, his head was full of questions and possibilities. He didn't know yet what was coming. He didn't know about the months of intensity that would follow. He didn't know about the crisis he would face. or the moment when he would be pushed to the very edge of what he could endure. He just knew that something had shifted. Someone had seen him, not as a maintenance worker, as someone with capacity, as someone who might be capable of more than survival. Chapter 5. Aftermath and Discovery. Back at the apartment, Sophie was already asleep. Marcus sat in the dark kitchen with his laptop and typed Victoria Ashford's name into Google. What came back was not what he expected. Articles about Ashford's systems, a profile in a business magazine, photos of Victoria at conferences, Victoria presenting to industry groups, Victoria on panels discussing infrastructure and resilience, the future of how cities would function, Victoria building a company that was now valued at over $1 billion. Then he found it. A news article from 6 years ago. Victoria Ashford injured in car accident. Regains control of company from hospital bed. The accident had been severe. Spinal injury, permanent paralysis. She could have stepped down. She could have handed over control while she recovered. She could have taken the insurance settlement and lived a comfortable life on the margins of the world she'd built. She didn't. She learned how to lead from a hospital room. She learned how to work from a wheelchair. She didn't see the accident as an ending. She saw it as a problem to be solved, a system that needed adjustment. Marcus felt something shift in his understanding of her. This wasn't a woman who was handed everything. This was a woman who had clawed her way to power and kept clawing even after something tried to stop her. This was a woman who understood something about persistence that went beyond the normal kind. He searched for the job listing and found it posted on the company website. Systems Integration Director, $145,000 annual salary, health insurance, dental, vision, remote work options, flexible schedule. That number hit him like a physical thing. 4 times what he made now. 4 times. With that number, Sophie could go to a better school. They could move to a better apartment. He could sleep more than 5 hours a night. Without the second job, it was breathing room. It was the possibility of stability. But it was also terrifying. He had a high school diploma and trade training. He'd never gone to college. He'd never done anything that required formal credentials. How would he ever be qualified for something like that? Derek called that evening. So, Derek asked, how did it go? Marcus was cautious but honest. She set me up. You both set me up? Derek laughed. Yeah, I was going to be honest about that eventually. Why? Derek explained. Victoria had called him specifically. She'd said his name came up in her research. She'd asked if Derek thought Marcus would be someone who would take something seriously if it was offered to him. Derek had said yes. Victoria had said good, because she had someone she wanted to meet. She's a good person, Derek said. She doesn't hire people to rescue them, but she does hire people she thinks are worth investing in. And Marcus? She doesn't make that call often. When she does, it usually means something. Why would she care about me? Marcus asked. I'm nobody. Derek said something that stayed with Marcus for a long time after. Because Victoria sees people the way engineers see systems. She understands how things work, and she understands what happens when a good system gets neglected. I think she sees that in you. Potential that's being wasted because you're too focused on survival. To think about anything else. She sees waste, and she figures out how to fix it. Chapter 6. The Decision. The next day, something happened that forced the issue. Sophie came home from school with a notice in her backpack. A communication from the school office. Her lunch account was overdue. $87.43 for meals from the past 3 months. Marcus had never been behind on the lunch account before. He'd always managed it. He'd made sure Sophie ate at school, but he'd been working less. Taking time off for that meeting with Victoria. Adjusting his schedule because the new job discussion had thrown his calculations off. And the math hadn't worked out the way he'd intended. Now there was this notice. And with it came a policy explanation. The school would provide meals, the debt would accumulate, and if the debt reached $200, the district was required to refer the case to a family services office for assessment of financial hardship. This wasn't about hunger. Sophie wasn't going to starve. This was about documentation. This was about official notice that the family was struggling. This was about systems designed to help. That could also be systems designed to intrude. Marcus paid it immediately. He used his credit card, the same card he'd used to buy his funeral blazer years ago. He would pay it off over time. He would stretch the payments across the months until it was absorbed into his budget, but it was money that was supposed to be for next month's utilities. That night, he sat with Sophie at the kitchen table and talked about money in a way he never had before. Not to frighten her, but to be honest. There are things happening that I'm working through, he said. It might mean changes for us, but I want you to know that I'm always going to make sure you're okay. No matter what happens, you're my priority. Sophie was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that broke something in Marcus, something he wouldn't fully understand for a long time. Dad, I don't need expensive things, she said. I just don't want you to be so worried all the time. That's when Marcus made his decision. He wasn't taking this job because Victoria had sold him on the work. or because the salary was attractive. He was taking it because his daughter deserved a father who wasn't crushed by financial anxiety, and maybe she deserved to see him try something bigger than survival. He emailed Victoria that night. "I'm in. When do I start?" Victoria's response came within minutes. "Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Office. We have work to do." Marcus had exactly 16 hours to process the biggest life change since Sophie was born. Part 3. Escalation. Multi-layer. Chapter 7. The first day. False security. Marcus showed up at 8:45 a.m. in new clothing he'd bought with his credit card, a button-down shirt from a department store, pants without stains from mechanical work, shoes that didn't have grease embedded in the creases. He told himself he could pay the credit card off now. He told himself that was how this worked now. You bought things first and paid for them later. He told himself that the 4-to-1 salary increase meant he could absorb these costs. The Ashford Systems office occupied several floors in a different building, not the one where Marcus had been working for the last 12 years. This building was newer. Glass and steel and expensive wood, the kind of space designed to communicate power and stability and success. He took the elevator up to the 24th floor. He'd never been this high in a building in a professional capacity. He'd been higher. HVAC work sometimes required access to the mechanical spaces above the roofs, but always in the infrastructure, always in the unseen systems. The office itself was exactly what he would have imagined. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a view of the city that communicated scale, furniture designed for power, not comfort, people in expensive clothing moving with purpose through the space. Marcus felt every inch of being out of place. His new shirt suddenly seemed cheap. His new pants seemed poorly fitting. He wasn't transformed by the clothes. He was just a maintenance worker wearing new clothes. Victoria's office was private. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a desk positioned so that she could see the city while she worked. Furniture that was clearly expensive. Though Marcus couldn't have said how he knew that, it was just something about the quality, the way things fit together, the precision of it. Victoria was working when he arrived. She was reading something on her computer. She didn't look up immediately. She finished whatever she was doing. Then she turned her attention to him. This was deliberate. Marcus understood that. It was a small assertion of hierarchy, in her space, on her time. She was in control. He was the one entering into her world. She spent the next 2 hours with him explaining the work. She showed him projects Ashford Systems had completed. Infrastructure resilience programs, grid integration work, municipal planning that involved understanding how systems failed and how to prevent that failure. As she explained, Marcus realized something. He understood this, not all of it immediately. But the logic was clear. The patterns made sense. He had spent 12 years understanding how HVAC systems worked, how air moved through a building, how heat transfer happened, how components failed if they weren't maintained. He had learned to think in systems. He asked questions, real questions. Questions that showed he was actually thinking about what Victoria was saying. Questions that showed he understood that this work was about more than just technical proficiency. It was about understanding complex relationships between different components. Victoria's answers came with nods. She seemed satisfied with his engagement. She seemed to be evaluating him in real time and finding him acceptable. At the end of the first day, Victoria said, "You're going to be great at this, but it's going to be hard. I'm going to push you, and sometimes you'll feel like you're in over your head. That's normal. That's also the point." Marcus left the building feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. He picked up Sophie early from school, something he could do now because he had flexible hours. He took her to get ice cream. He told her about his new job. He told her about the better salary. He told her that things were going to be different now. She smiled. It was the smile of a child who had been waiting for something to shift and had finally seen it move. That night, he slept better than he had in years. For the first time in a long time, he fell asleep without running through the month's math in his head. He fell asleep feeling like maybe, just maybe, something had changed. Chapter 8. The transformation, how intensity changes everything. But the next week something shifted. The work was intense, more intense than anything Marcus had done before. Victoria wanted completed projects on timelines that seemed impossible. She questioned his approaches, not defensively, but deeply. She pushed him to understand not just how things worked, but why they worked that way. Why certain design choices mattered. Why redundancy was important. Why failure modes had to be anticipated. This was intellectual work, in a way that his previous job had never been. In the maintenance job, the work was physical and technical. You identified a problem. You solved it. You moved on. There was clarity in that. There was completion. This work didn't have that clarity. This work required him to think at a level he wasn't sure he was capable of thinking, to hold multiple variables in his mind simultaneously, to understand relationships between components he'd never worked with before. He started working late, 7 p.m., 8 p.m., sometimes 9 p.m. He would sit at his desk, looking at spreadsheets and design documents and technical specifications, and he would feel like his brain was going to crack. from the effort of trying to understand it all. He was still home before Sophie went to bed, usually, sometimes just barely. Sometimes Sophie would be in her pajamas, waiting for him, and they would have 15 minutes together before she had to sleep. Sophie didn't complain, but Marcus noticed she was quieter. She was watching him with the same kind of careful observation she'd watched him with before. The observation of someone learning the patterns of their world. She was worried. She was worried that her father was going to disappear again. The way her mother had disappeared when she was small. Not physically, but emotionally. Not there even though he was present. 2 weeks into the job, Victoria called him into her office. In the late afternoon, she didn't make small talk. She said, "You're holding back. You're capable of more than what you're delivering. But you're afraid of failing. I need you to stop being afraid." The criticism landed hard. Marcus was working 60-hour weeks. He was giving everything he had, and Victoria was saying it wasn't enough. He pushed harder. He worked even later. He started taking work home on weekends. He would sit at their kitchen table while Sophie watched TV, and he would be reviewing documents, checking calculations, trying to understand the things he didn't understand yet. By the 4th week, Marcus was drowning. It was different from the drowning of his previous life. Before, he was drowning in the small pressures, rent, utilities, food. Now he was drowning in expectations, in the sense that he was being tested, and might not pass the test. Sophie got sick, just a cold, nothing serious, but she needed to stay home from school for 2 days. Marcus asked Victoria if he could work from home. Victoria agreed immediately, which surprised him. She even said, "Take care of your daughter. That matters more than anything here." But Marcus was so deep in a project that he couldn't separate himself from it. He took calls while Sophie watched TV. He was on his laptop while she needed help with something. By day 2, Sophie was frustrated and tired, and she said something that cut through him completely. "You're here, but you're not really here, Dad." The words were honest. They weren't mean. They were just true. Marcus had replicated the exact thing he was trying to escape. Physical presence without emotional presence. He was there, but not really there. His body was in the apartment, but his mind was somewhere else. That evening, after Sophie was asleep, Marcus had a moment of clarity and panic in equal measure. He had made a terrible mistake. He'd chosen this job, he'd chosen the opportunity, and now he was losing his daughter in the process. He called Derek. "I can't do this," he said. "The job is killing me. I'm not present for Sophie. I'm not who I want to be." Derek listened. Then he said something that sounded like a warning. This is exactly what Victoria wanted to know. Whether you'd commit to the work or whether you'd bail when it got hard. Don't bail, Marcus, but also don't forget why you took the job in the first place. Marcus tried to slow down. He tried to find balance, but Victoria sensed something was wrong. Her perceptions were sharp. She noticed everything. She called him into her office. "You're distracted," she said. It wasn't a question. "Your work quality has dropped about 20% in the past week." Marcus explained about Sophie, about the struggle to balance work and parenting, about feeling like he was failing both things. Victoria's response was cold. "Then make a choice. Commit to the work or go back to maintenance. I don't hire people who are half in." Marcus felt rage and despair in equal measure. He thought this was supposed to be different. He thought Victoria understood about Sophie, but Victoria was asking him to be something he couldn't be. Someone who could separate fatherhood from career. Someone who could choose ambition over love. That night, Marcus made a decision. He was going to quit. He'd go back to maintenance. It wasn't as much money, but at least he wouldn't be torn apart between two things that both mattered to him. He drafted an email to Victoria. "I appreciate the opportunity, but this isn't working. I'm resigning effective immediately." But before he sent it, something stopped him. A thought. What if Victoria was right? What if he was using Sophie as an excuse to avoid the difficulty of growth? What if the real issue was that he was afraid of success, that he was more comfortable in struggle than in the challenge of becoming something more? He didn't send the email. Instead, he called Victoria and asked to meet. Chapter 9, The Confrontation. They met in her office. Late on a Thursday night, the building was almost empty. The cleaning staff had already finished. The other office workers had gone home hours ago. It was just the two of them, in this temple to commerce, that was now quiet and dark, except for the lights they'd turned on. Marcus came prepared. He'd thought about this conversation. While lying awake next to Sophie as she slept, he'd thought about what he wanted to say and how he wanted to say it. He said, "You asked me to commit, but you also asked me to make a choice. Between this job and Sophie, those two things are in direct conflict. I can't choose between them, because Sophie will always come first. So either you need to understand that, or I need to leave." Victoria listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't defend herself. She let him finish. And then she said something that surprised him. "I was wrong." 3 words, 2 syllables, but they landed with weight. "I pushed you the way I push people who are in a position to take it," Victoria continued. "But you're not in that position. You have a child, and I should have accounted for that from the beginning." Marcus didn't know how to respond to Victoria admitting she was wrong. "The balance you're looking for," Victoria said, It doesn't exist, not in the way you're imagining. But what does exist is rhythm. Weeks where work is intense and Sophie understands that. Weeks where you pull back and she gets more of you. And a job that doesn't require you to sacrifice who you are. To be successful. She paused. This job can be that job. But not if I'm asking you to be someone you're not. And I was asking that. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. This was the first time Victoria had been vulnerable with him. The first time she'd acknowledged that her way might not be the only way. The first time she'd shown that she could bend. What does this mean? He asked. Victoria explained. She was going to restructure his role. He'd work with specific teams on specific projects, but he wouldn't be expected to be available 24/7. He'd have control over his schedule. He could say no to things that would compromise his time with Sophie, and she was going to raise his salary 15%, as a way of apologizing for the impossible demands. Marcus was stunned. Why would you do that? Victoria answered honestly. Because I've spent my whole life building systems that work, and I'm starting to realize that the most important system isn't the company, it's the life you build outside of it. And I nearly broke yours. She paused. I'm not going to do that. Not to you, not to anyone else who works with me moving forward. As Marcus left the office that night, he felt something he hadn't felt before from Victoria. Respect. Not admiration, not sympathy, but actual respect. Because he'd stood up for what mattered to him. Because he'd been willing to walk away, rather than sacrifice his integrity, or his relationship with his daughter. Chapter 10. The twist. Over the next month, Marcus settled into the job with a new rhythm. It was better. The work was still challenging, but manageable. Sophie was happier. He was sleeping better. He had the space to be both a father and a professional. But something was still bothering him about the whole situation. The way Victoria had approached him, the blind date setup, the research, the intensity of her interest. It didn't add up as just coincidence. One day he accidentally discovered a file on the company server. A file he probably shouldn't have had access to. He was looking for something else. A technical specification from a previous project. And there it was. Potential strategic hires. His name was on it. Page 3, highlighted in yellow, with notes written next to it. Shows systems thinking. Low ego. Will prioritize integrity over advancement. Resilient. Trainable. History suggests will make sacrifices for what matters. Not motivated by external validation. Marcus understood then. Victoria hadn't chosen him because of general potential. She'd chosen him because of his specific qualities. Because she needed someone with exactly his combination of intelligence, humility, and values, he realized. Victoria didn't trick him on a blind date because she was bored or cruel. She recruited him. She orchestrated an introduction because she's too smart to waste time on coincidence. She studied him the way she studies all systems. She identified the problem. She designed a solution. But here's what had changed. Marcus didn't feel manipulated anymore. He felt chosen, like someone had seen what he was and decided it was worth investing in. There's a difference between being used and being recognized. And Victoria had crossed that line when she admitted her mistakes and adjusted her approach. Marcus asked Victoria about the file. She didn't deny it. She explained, I've been building this company for 18 years, and I've realized something. The thing that makes systems resilient isn't the people who are willing to sacrifice everything. It's the people who know what not to sacrifice. It's the people who understand that some things, she paused, a child, integrity, the capacity to care about something beyond themselves. Those things are foundational. People like you. Marcus understood. Victoria wasn't interested in him as a romantic possibility. Though there was something there, unspoken. She was interested in him as the foundation for a better company. A company that doesn't destroy people in pursuit of profit. Part 4. Breaking point/climax, build. Chapter 11. The real antagonist. Everything had been moving toward equilibrium. Marcus had found balance. Victoria had become a mentor and ally. The job was good. Sophie was happy. Then something unexpected happened. Marcus was in a meeting with Victoria and the company's board. They were presenting a major infrastructure project for a municipal resilience program. A $50 million contract. It could double the company's valuation. One board member, Richard Hansen, 58 years old, old money, real estate developer, the kind of man who inherited power and learned to use it, asked, Who's doing the technical design on this? Victoria said. Marcus Collins, my systems integration director. Richard paused. You're putting a maintenance worker in charge of a $50 million infrastructure project? He said. He doesn't even have an engineering degree. The dismissal was casual. Richard didn't say it with anger. He said it with the certainty of someone who had never had his assumptions challenged. In his world, credentials mattered, background mattered, the right schools mattered. A person without those things wasn't qualified, regardless of actual competence. Victoria responded. His credentials are different than traditional, but his thinking is sound. He understands systems resilience better than most engineers I've worked with. And frankly, I trust his judgment more than I trust judgment that comes from a degree. Richard shrugged. I'm just saying it's a risk, and this board is responsible for managing risk. If something goes wrong with this project, the company stands to lose $50 million and our reputation. I'd recommend bringing in someone with more traditional credentials. The other board members murmured agreement. Marcus watched it happen. He watched his competence being questioned, not based on his actual work, but based on his background, based on class, based on where he came from and how he got here. The board voted. Richard's concern was noted. Marcus would stay on the project, but a senior engineer would be brought in to oversee his work. It was a small thing, a procedural thing, but it meant that Richard had won. It meant that his prejudice was institutionalized. It meant that Marcus now had to prove himself, in a way that people with the right background didn't have to. Victoria was furious after the meeting. She didn't express it loudly. Her anger was cold and precise, like everything else about her. That was about class, not competence. She said, Richard sees a maintenance worker and his brain stops calculating actual ability. It goes straight to dismissal. Because in his world, people like you aren't supposed to be doing work like this. Over the next 2 weeks, the senior engineer brought in, David Martinez, started undermining Marcus's work. Not overtly, but he'd suggest changes without asking. He'd present Marcus's ideas to clients as his own ideas. He'd question Marcus's assumptions in meetings, in a way designed to plant doubt. Marcus tried to handle it professionally, but the stress was mounting. He was working 70-hour weeks again, Sophie was retreating again, and now he had to deal with a senior engineer who saw him as competition to be eliminated. One night, David approached him in the hallway. Look, I'm not trying to be a jerk, David said. But Victoria made a mistake bringing you in at this level. You don't have the credentials. And frankly, I don't think you have the capacity to handle work of this complexity. I'm trying to do you a favor by taking some of the responsibility off your shoulders. Marcus recognized the manipulation for what it was. A power play disguised as help. David was trying to push him out, while appearing to protect him. Marcus told Victoria what was happening. Victoria said she'd handle it, but the board members were watching to see if Marcus could actually do the work. And David was carefully documenting every suggestion he made, building a record that could be used to demonstrate that Marcus wasn't capable. The pressure built. Marcus was questioned at every turn. His decisions were challenged. His calculations were reviewed for errors. It was a form of organizational hazing, designed to prove he didn't belong. Sophie noticed the deterioration in her father. She didn't understand why he seemed scared all the time. She just knew that something was wrong. Marcus started thinking. Maybe Richard and David were right. Maybe he didn't belong here. Maybe Victoria had taken a chance on someone who couldn't actually cut it. Chapter 12. The System Fails. 6 weeks into the Municipal Resilience Project, there was a critical meeting. With the City Council and the project stakeholders, Marcus had completed the design. He was confident in it. It accounted for failure modes. It built in redundancy. It was resilient. It was good work. But at the presentation, David made a small suggestion. He highlighted a theoretical vulnerability in Marcus's backup system design. It wasn't a real vulnerability. David was being technically misleading, but it was phrased in a way that sounded authoritative. It was phrased by someone who appeared to have credentials. It was phrased by someone who belonged in this world. The City Council asked Marcus about this vulnerability. Marcus explained that it wasn't actually a vulnerability. It had been accounted for in the redundancy system. The design was sound, but as he was explaining, he could see doubt in the room. He could see the council members exchanging looks. He could see Richard Hansen nodding slightly, as if his earlier concerns had been validated. After the meeting, the City Council made their request. They wanted David to take over the project design, with Marcus in a subordinate role. It was a public humiliation, and it confirmed what they'd been trying to prove, that Marcus wasn't qualified. Victoria saw it happen, and something changed in her expression. It wasn't anger, it was recognition. The moment when she realized what had been happening, the moment when she understood that she had left him vulnerable to forces she had power to control. That evening, Victoria called Marcus into her office. For the first time, she looked defeated. "I'm sorry," she said. "I should have protected you. I should have seen what David was doing and stopped it before this happened," Marcus said. "He's better at office politics than I am. He's better at knowing how to undermine someone, in ways that look like help." Victoria nodded. "This is my fault. I brought you into an environment that wasn't ready for you. The board wasn't ready, and I didn't fight hard enough to change their minds." Marcus made a decision then. He told Victoria he was quitting. "I came to get away from invisibility," he said. "But I just traded one form of invisibility for another. Here, I'm invisible because I don't have the right pedigree. Before, I was invisible because I was at the bottom. I don't know which is worse." Victoria tried to convince him to stay. She promised to fix things. She promised to remove David. She promised to fight the board. But Marcus had seen how the system worked. He was exhausted, not just physically, but existentially. He'd been given a chance, and the system had conspired to prove he didn't deserve it. He went home, picked up Sophie early from school, and told her they were going to figure something out together. That night, as he was looking at job listings, Marcus received an email from Victoria. She'd called an emergency board meeting for the next morning. Part 5. Climax and Justice. Chapter 13. The Reversal. The next morning, Victoria did something extraordinary. She called the board meeting, and she presented a detailed analysis of David's vulnerability. She showed with technical precision exactly why his concerns were based on misunderstanding, not on actual engineering flaws. She then presented her own analysis of Marcus's design. It was sound. More than sound. It was excellent. It was the kind of design that would serve the city well. It was the kind of design that would prevent failures and save lives. But that wasn't the main point of the meeting. Victoria then showed the board something else. Documentation of David's actions, the way he'd undermined Marcus, the way he'd stolen credit for ideas, the way he deliberately misrepresented technical information to undermine a colleague for his own advancement. She said, David Martinez is a talented engineer, but he's also someone who thrives on making others smaller, to make himself seem larger. And I won't have that in this company, not anymore. She then turned to Richard Hansen and said, And Richard, I'm going to be very direct. Your initial concern about Marcus wasn't about technical capability, it was about class. It was about the fact that he didn't come from the right background. It was about your own discomfort with the idea that someone from a different world could actually do this work. And when that prejudice wasn't enough to eliminate him, you allowed someone else to do it for you. That's not the kind of thinking I want on this board. Richard tried to respond, but Victoria cut him off. You can resign, or I can force you out through my majority stake. Either way, you're off this board effective immediately. Richard left the meeting. Victoria then made an announcement to the remaining board members. Marcus was being promoted to Senior Systems Integration Director. David was being fired immediately. His severance would be minimal. His non-disclosure agreement would be extensive. She looked directly at the remaining board members. I'm done compromising on who belongs here. Marcus belongs here, and anyone who has a problem with that can find another company to sit on the board of. The remaining board members nodded. They understood. The power dynamic had shifted. Victoria had made her position clear. As the meeting ended, Victoria called Marcus in. She told him everything that had happened. She told him she had fought. She told him she had won. Marcus felt something break open inside him. Not just relief, but vindication. Someone had seen what happened. Someone had fought back. Someone had refused to let the system destroy him. Chapter 14. The Aftermath. The promotion came with a substantial raise, more responsibility, direct access to Victoria, but more importantly, it came with legitimacy. The board had accepted him. The company had accepted him. The system had shifted. David fought it legally, claiming wrongful termination. But Ashford Systems' documentation was meticulous. Everything was recorded. Everything was evidenced. After 3 months, David's lawyer advised him that the case was unwinnable. He settled for severance and agreed to a non-disclosure agreement. Richard Hansen stepped down quietly. He was replaced by someone younger, someone with more diversity in their thinking, someone who understood that intelligence and capability didn't require a specific pedigree. Marcus completed the Municipal Resilience Project. It was successful. The City Council praised the design. It became a case study for infrastructure resilience. Ashford Systems won additional contracts based on the success. And Marcus's name was on it. Public, visible, no longer invisible. Sophie saw the article in the paper about the successful project. She read that Marcus Collins, Director of Systems Integration at Ashford Systems, designed the resilience architecture. She asked her father to read it to her again. She told him, I'm proud of you, Dad. That night, Marcus sat in the dark kitchen, thinking about the journey. From invisible maintenance worker to recognized director. From barely surviving to thriving. The thing that changed wasn't the job itself. It was the moment Victoria decided that she would fight the system, to make room for him. It was the moment when someone with power chose to use that power, not to maintain the status quo, but to change it. He realized something. The reason Victoria orchestrated the blind date. The reason she researched him. The reason she pushed so hard. It wasn't because she saw him as broken and needed fixing. It was because she recognized a quality in him that the world was wasting. And when the system tried to discard him, she chose to fight the system instead, rather than accepting its judgment. That's the real story. That's what changed everything. Chapter 15. The New Equilibrium. 6 months after the board meeting, Ashford Systems announced a new initiative, Systems Integration Fellowship. It was designed to recruit people from non-traditional backgrounds, who had systems thinking, but lacked formal credentials. Victoria asked Marcus to help design the fellowship, to set the criteria, to be part of the hiring process. Marcus did, and for the first time he wasn't just benefiting from the system being changed. He was actively changing it for others. Sophie was now 10 years old. She still went to the same school, but her life was different. Her father was present. He wasn't working 2 jobs. He wasn't exhausted all the time. He was still her father, but he was also becoming something more. She was aware that her father had experienced something unfair, and that he had survived it, and that the person who hired him decided to fight for him when the system tried to push him out. One night, Sophie asked her father, "Are you happy now?" Marcus thought about the question carefully. Is he happy? The job is good, the money is better, his life has breathing room. He can think about things beyond survival. But happiness isn't quite the right word. The right word is seen, he told Sophie. I'm happier than I was. Not because life is perfect, but because people see me now, and that makes a difference. Part 6, Resolution, Chapter 16, the story complete. Years later, when someone asks Marcus about the blind date that changed his life, he tells the whole story. The deception, the opportunity, the struggle, the moment when Victoria fought for him. He tells them, Victoria Ashford didn't save me, but she did something arguably better. She recognized what I was capable of. And when the system tried to prove me wrong, she refused to accept it. That's what made the difference. The last image is of Marcus in his office on the 24th floor. He's on a video call with Victoria, discussing a new project. Sophie is in the background, doing homework at his desk. She sometimes comes to the office after school now. There's a photo on his wall. Him and Sophie at a professional event. He's in a suit, she's in a dress. Both smiling. The caption underneath reads, "They tricked the poor single dad on a blind date, and it changed everything." It's not ironic, it's just true. The deception wasn't about romance, it was about recognition. And sometimes that's the most powerful thing one person can offer another. The choice to see someone clearly, the choice to fight for them, the choice to say, you belong here. Marcus thinks about that cold November night, when he put on a blazer that didn't quite fit, and walked into a restaurant not knowing what he was walking into. He thinks about the moment when he understood that this wasn't a blind date. He thinks about the months that followed, the hope, the crisis, the breaking point, the reversal. He thinks about his daughter, who watched all of it, who saw her father struggle and survive and ultimately thrive, who learned from watching him that you can say no to systems that don't serve you, that you can stand up for what matters, that you can fight even when the odds are against you. He thinks about Victoria, who saw something in him that he didn't see in himself, who pushed him to be better, and who also had the wisdom to recognize when pushing was too much, who built a company, but also learned how to build it in a way that didn't destroy people. And he thinks about the fellowship program, which has now helped 23 people transition from working-class jobs into meaningful technical roles. 23 people who were invisible to the world until someone decided to see them. Marcus still fixes complex systems, but now the systems he fixes are larger. They're infrastructure that serves entire cities. They're the kind of systems that determine whether hospitals can operate during emergencies, whether emergency services can communicate, whether communities can survive when things fall apart. And it all started because a man said yes to something he didn't understand, because he was willing to take a chance on possibility, when his life had become only survival. The world is full of people like Marcus Collins, capable, intelligent, resilient people whose potential is being wasted, because they're trapped in survival. They're working multiple jobs, they're stretched thin, they're invisible. Victoria saw that, and she acted, and she showed that one person, with power and resources and the willingness to use them, can change the trajectory of another person's life. That's not a romantic story, it's a story about recognition. It's a story about power being used to build instead of destroy. It's a story about someone choosing to fight for dignity when the system would prefer invisibility. It's a story about how the trickiest, most important things in life are often the most simple. Being seen, being valued, being given a chance to become what you were always capable of becoming. Epilogue. The long view. 5 years after that cold November night, Marcus was running his own consulting firm, not as a way to leave Ashford Systems. Victoria had made clear that she wanted him to stay, but as an additional venture. He was teaching. He was writing about infrastructure resilience. He was becoming a voice in conversations about how systems could be designed to serve people rather than destroy them. The fellowship program had expanded beyond Ashford Systems. Other companies were beginning to implement similar programs. Other leaders were beginning to understand that credentials weren't the only measure of capability. Sophie was 14 now. She was thinking about college. She was thinking about systems design. She watched her father build something from nothing, and now she wanted to build something too. Victoria was still running Ashford Systems. She was still making strategic decisions about who belonged in the company and who didn't. But she was doing it with a clearer eye now. With an understanding that potential doesn't look like credentials, that intelligence doesn't require a specific pedigree, that the system works better when you're willing to change it. On a cold November evening, exactly 5 years after the first blind date, Marcus and Victoria met for dinner. Not for business, just to remember, just to acknowledge what changed that night, Victoria said. You know, I orchestrated everything about that evening. Every detail was planned, the restaurant, the private room, the way I revealed myself. I wanted to see who you were when nothing was what you expected. Marcus smiled. I know, I figured it out. Did you hate it? Victoria asked. The manipulation? Marcus thought about this carefully. I hated it at the time, but I understand it now. You were seeing something that nobody else was willing to see, and you were willing to be deceptive to create the conditions for me to be seen. That's a kind interpretation, Victoria said. It's an honest one, Marcus said. You didn't trick me into failure, you tricked me into possibility. There's a difference. They ate dinner, they talked about projects, they talked about the fellowship, they talked about the people who had been helped by it, they talked about the cities that are now safer because of the infrastructure Marcus designed. And somewhere in that conversation, there's a moment of recognition between them. Not romantic, not even particularly warm, but real, deep. The kind of understanding that comes from having been through something difficult together. Victoria says, thank you for not giving up when you wanted to quit. Thank you for not quitting, Marcus says. Thank you for fighting for me. When the system wanted to push me out, thank you for fighting back. They don't need to say more than that. The story is written, the trajectory is clear. What was once invisible is now visible. What was once impossible is now real. And somewhere in the city, other people are working maintenance jobs. Other people are stretched thin. Other people are invisible. But some of them, maybe not many, but some, might get a chance because of what happened in that restaurant 5 years ago. The blind date that wasn't a blind date. The trick that wasn't malicious. The poor single dad who became something more because someone decided to see him. That's where the story ends. That's where, in many ways, it continues.